What is up, health enthusiasts? It's Coach Lamby here for Working Weights LLC, your guide to strength, health, and all things nutrition. I'm joined as always by my co-host, Dwayne Ulrich, aka Poppy Dwirl.
Hey guys, how you doing?
And today we are talking about testosterone and diet.
Yum.
All right, Dwayne, how you doing?
Good, man. Good. Weather's good. Sun's shining, but there's some cold weather coming down to Houston,
Yeah.
and not as cold as it is in Show Low. Not as cold as it is in Iowa.
Yeah.
But just saying. So looking forward to having a little cool weather with some solid sunshine for a while.
Yeah.
Looking more forward to today's podcast, man. Nutrition and testosterone.
Nutrition and testosterone. Absolutely.
Exciting. Good stuff.
Yeah. So our buddy Philip Pape over there at Wits and Weights sent me a message a few weeks ago, and I'm going to get into the whole thing about why it took that long to do. All right. So he says, "Hey friend, topic suggestion for you: the effect of nutrition on testosterone, particularly total and free, and particularly men, to support or bust the myth of high versus low carb bulking and cutting phases and level of leanness, etc., and how to measure T, including all the confusing ranges and units used by different labs." Okay, so yeah, so he sent me that, and I thought that was a pretty good topic. And getting into the diet aspect, like it actually took me longer to kind of find a signal in the noise, so to speak, than I had anticipated. But I think I found some pretty cool stuff. So happy to get into this today. And let me get it.
And there is a lot of noise out there too.
There's a lot of noise out there.
Yeah, as I was prepping, I know people like the second or third week in a row that I've really done some serious prep into getting ready for the podcast. Yeah, I just found all kinds of stuff. Some contradictory, um, some don't cite studies. They just kind of jabber and put it out there and expect you to believe it. So,
Yeah. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Before we get into anything today, I am definitely putting up the disclaimer on today's podcast episode. So I want to, so this is up. You guys can see it. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this is not medical advice. This is not advice designed to diagnose, treat, prevent, or cure anything. All of everything that I'm going to say today is my own opinion, and please, you need to consult with your own doctor or an endocrinologist or someone who specializes and has the ability to prescribe a medication for your specific needs. All right, so that is
well
out of the
done.
way.
Well done.
All right, so Philip asked me to kind of break this down into some of the main questions here. And I came up with 5 main questions. I came up with a lot more than 5, but I thought I need to narrow these down to maybe just less than that. So number 1, does nutrition affect testosterone levels? Number 2, what is the impact of high carb versus low carb diets on testosterone levels? 3, do the bulking and cutting phases of periodized nutrition impact testosterone levels? 4, does the level of leanness affect testosterone levels? And 5, how is testosterone measured? And what are the confusing ranges and units used by different labs? So as I was going through and putting together all the information for this, it started to become very apparent to me that we need to start out with a kind of a short intro into biology here, because some of this stuff won't make sense unless I preface it with this little lesson here. So dealing with testosterone production, what we're talking about is the HPG axis, hypothalamus pituitary gonadal axis. And up at the top here, the hypothalamus is this kind of yellowish brownish region, and that is located kind of in the middle of the brain. Below it is the pituitary gland. The hypothalamus releases gonadotropin releasing hormone, and that stimulates the pituitary gland to release luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, which going forward, I'm probably just going to refer to all of these by their abbreviations. Those hormones will stimulate the gonads in men and women, so the testes and the ovaries, as well as the adrenal glands. The adrenal glands sit on top of your kidneys. That's that orangish kind of area right here on top.
Mm-hmm.
And then those organs release testosterone, and free testosterone is what has its effect on our tissues. Now, all of these hormones act as a negative feedback system. So in order for each of these organs to know how much of what hormones to produce, they need to sense the levels of the other hormones within the system. So as testosterone is produced, the level of free testosterone will signal to the pituitary gland to either increase or decrease luteinizing and follicle stimulating hormone. LH and FSH will stimulate the hypothalamus and tell it how much and when to release gonadotropin releasing hormone. Okay, so the whole system is its own closed loop, and it's a negative feedback. Testosterone production exists on a diurnal rhythm, or some might call it circadian. It's normally, granted, this is if you have a normal sleep cycle, right? So you sleep during the night and you're awake during the day. If you have night shifts or something, your stuff's probably going to be all messed up. So testosterone production is normally highest during the morning, or between 8 and 10 a.m., more closer to 8 for most people. And then it also exists on about a 48 to 72 hour peak spectrum. So your highest peak levels will exist on about a 72 hour. Every 72 hours, you'll get the highest testosterone production. And the levels vary hour and hour to day. Now, LH from the pituitary gland bonds directly to the Leydig cell in the testes. Okay, and here we have a cross section of our Leydig cell. We have our brush border here. This is our luteinizing hormone receptor. Luteinizing hormone bonds to that receptor, binds to that receptor, and is taken into the cell. We also have LDL particle. Those bind to their receptors and get taken in, and cholesterol is stripped from that. LH combines with acetate and cholesterol in the mitochondria to produce pregnenolone. Pregnenolone goes through several conversions to ultimately end up as the testosterone hormone that we are looking for. Testosterone itself will bind to specific androgen receptors on muscle tissue, liver, adipose, and a few others to exert its specific biological effects on those tissues. Testosterone is converted by 5-alpha reductase to turn into dihydrotestosterone, or DHT, and that has a specific androgen receptor, and that exerts its effects on skin and hair, prostate and gonadal tissue. And then testosterone is also converted to estradiol by aromatase through the process of aromatization. Some people may have heard of aromatase inhibitors. So that turns into estrogen, and that binds to estrogen receptors, or estradiol rather, receptors, and has an effect on brain and bone. Testosterone, estrogen, and DHT will all signal to the liver to produce a couple of proteins called sex hormone binding globulin and albumin. Albumin and sex hormone binding globulin will bind to the testosterone in our blood, circulating around in our blood, and the majority of testosterone is bound up by SHBG. And that's a pretty tight bond. It's kind of hard to break, but it's not impossible. And it's around 50 to 60%. That 50 to 60% of your total testosterone is bound by SHBG. About 38%, somewhere in that area, is bound to albumin, and that's a loose bind. So it's easier to break that bond for that testosterone to become available. About 2% of what's floating around in your blood is actually free. It's not protein bound. And so these proteins is kind of a tangent. A lot of people, these are called carrier proteins, and a lot of people will refer to them as like a trafficking vehicle for these hormones, or like a taxi or an Uber, right? It carries it around in your bloodstream. What sex hormone, SHBG and albumin actually kind of do and we're gonna go over this, is they help moderate the amount of testosterone that is converted into estradiol and DHT. Okay. So rather than thinking about these proteins as a taxi service, testosterone can actually float around it can transfer through your body without being bound to a protein. So we think about other lipids. So testosterone hormones are a class of lipid. If we think about like your cholesterol and triglycerides, those have to be packaged in a lipoprotein. They have to be transported in a protein because they can't float around in water-soluble blood. And then once they make it to a cell, certain things happen where that protein is removed from the lipids, and then the lipids get taken across the brush border, the cell membrane. Now, testosterone does not need to be bound to a protein in order to move around your blood. It can do that. 2% of the testosterone in your blood is free. It's not bound. Okay, so it doesn't actually require a protein to carry it around. So what these proteins do really, instead of acting like a taxi, they kind of act more like an escort or a bodyguard, right? So they're preventing free T from being converted, or they're helping to regulate the amount of free T that's being converted into estrogen and DHT. All right. But between the albumin bound and the free T, that's what kind of makes up the bioavailable testosterone that's in your system. Testosterone and estrogen, the free forms, are able to exert their effects on our tissues. So mainly for this discussion, we are kind of interested in muscle tissue, connective tissue, and bone, right? And so if we remember, estradiol has its effects on bone, testosterone would have its effects on muscle tissue. And so if the proper concentrations are not maintained as testosterone levels increase or decrease as we go through this topic, we could see beneficial effects happening in one kind of tissue and detrimental effects happening in another. So for instance, if free T was to go up considerably, but the conversion rate to estradiol was at a lower rate, so meaning your free T was higher than the ratio was higher than the estradiol, we could see positive effects on muscle tissue, but we could have a detrimental effect in our bone. Okay. And then conversely, if estradiol, the conversion was too high in estradiol and there wasn't enough free T, we could actually see some positive effects in our bone, but not in our muscles. We would maybe even see a sarcopenic effect. And a good example of this is guys who abuse testosterone. One of the main issues that they are faced with is that the muscle tissue is now able to become bigger and stronger faster than the connective tissue and the bone that it's attached to. And so you'll see a lot of guys snapping tendons and having joint issues when they're abusing testosterone.
Won't that also include a thinning of the outer tissue of the skin layers? So like when you have
you could see thinning of skin and problems
Right.
with hair and
Right.
balding and all that stuff. Yeah, definitely.
Right. Okay.
Going into measuring stuff. So we're talking about hypogonadism. That was probably going to be the main concern. We have two types of hypogonadism. We have a primary, which is an issue where the testes don't produce enough testosterone. We have secondary hypogonadism, which is where the hypothalamus or the pituitary are not producing enough signaling hormones. Symptoms associated with hypogonadism, some of the ones that we're concerned with as men: fatigue, decreased muscle mass, irritability, cognitive dysfunction, brain fog, lack of sleep or loss of sleep, decreased nighttime erections or morning wood, smaller testes, erectile dysfunction. And this is not an exhaustive list. There certainly are others, but these are kind of the ones that I thought most men are concerned with.
Mm-hmm.
Now, going into the testing, if you do not have symptoms, it is not advised to have your testosterone levels tested. Don't just be testing to see where you're at. And in fact, most primary care physicians, if you went in and you're not reporting any symptoms and you just wanted to have your testosterone checked, they probably won't do it.
Yeah.
So, you know, you need to have symptoms before you start going further into doing testing. So if you do present with symptoms, because many of them are non-specific, like fatigue, irritability, and brain fog, stuff like that, it's important to rule out common lifestyle factors before seeking the testing. Okay. So if you're noticing that you have some of these symptoms, it's important to address common things in your life before going and talking with your doctor about getting tested. So some of these things include being overweight or obese, having poor sleep hygiene or sleep apnea, malnutrition. So if you're on an extreme diet, like a vegan diet, or the other end, carnivore diet, you could experience some malnutrition. Extended hypocaloric diets. So for men, and particularly men who lift weights and train, we're talking about guys who are trying to stay shredded all year long, continually in a calorie deficit. Overtraining or physical exertion and stress. So if you work, road construction in South Texas in the middle of the summer and your boss is a jerk, you could probably see some fatigue and irritability stemming from that.
Yeah. Hey, can I jump in real quick?
Yeah, jump in.
So one of the first things we talked about, one of those first frames is also about the cycle of like well, high testosterone, like typically like early in the morning or like somewhere around 8 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
And you also mentioned about if you work a night shift, then
Mm.
that's going to look all crazy.
Yeah.
In addition to that, if you're only sleeping, and if you're just, I don't know, if you're just a late night person, you're up till 12, 1 o'clock, and then you get up at like 5 o'clock in the morning or 6, you're only pulling down somewhere between 4 and 6 hours of sleep.
Mm-hmm.
That's gonna change that whole rhythm as well, which could make you think, oh man, I must have low T. No, it's because you're not sleeping, dude.
Yeah.
So just see, I wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah. All right. Going into a diagnosis of low T. So a clinical diagnosis of low T requires both the characteristic symptoms and decreased serum T levels. Now we're going to talk about what decreased means, what low means. But in order to have a clinical diagnosis, you have to have both of those things. It's not just one or the other. The diagnosis of serum testosterone levels is always going to require 2 or more blood draws. We're going to talk about it. And this is because of day-to-day variation. So just like you brought up circadian rhythms,
Right.
and the 48 to 72 hour peak variation. And you need to be aware of the proper diagnosis of either primary or secondary hypogonadism to ensure the appropriate treatment. So if you walk in and we just get a low T number and you're being prescribed, exogenous testosterone, but it's actually due to low luteinizing hormone, right? You're taking the wrong thing to fix the wrong thing. And going on hormone replacement therapy is a lifelong decision, and this should not be taken lightly. I can't stress enough that you need to look into ruling out as many things as possible before going on hormone replacement therapy. All right, so your blood samples should be drawn as close to 8 a.m. as possible and being in a fasted state, okay? And there are some variations. So as you were saying, like if you stay up till midnight, some people do have a different biological circadian rhythm. And so it does exist the possibility where someone's biological circadian rhythm may have them go to sleep at 12 and wake up at 8 a.m. And so your actually peak concentrations might be pushed back a little further, right, between 10 and noon. So
Yep.
that is something to be aware of when dealing with this as well. And of course, talk to your
Right.
doctor about all this. All right, on that first draw, most likely you're just going to have total testosterone levels checked. And this could be in direct response to your symptoms or concerns, or could be part of a comprehensive panel. It may also be a good idea at this time to have a comprehensive panel done to further rule out any other causes like certain viruses, thyroid function, and nutrient statuses like vitamin D and iron. On the second draw, so if your first initial draw showed a low total testosterone, and it was done at 8 a.m. and fasted. A second one should be done to rule out the day-to-day variation. And that second one should be done on an even number of days from the first draw. So if you had your blood drawn on a Monday at 8 a.m. and you were fasted, and normally you would get your labs back, like, I don't know, whatever, let's just say Friday. The next blood draw you should do would be on Tuesday. Okay. And that is because of that 72 hour, 48 to 72 hour variation, right? So we want to be catching it on a different day. So if you're getting it on an even number of days, that's more likely to catch that high, very, very peak concentration. Okay. On the second draw, FSH, LH, SHBG, and albumin should be tested at this stage as well to establish your bioavailable levels of testosterone, especially if you are overweight or obese, or if your total levels are not concordant with your symptoms. Okay. Somebody might say, well, why don't I just have all this done on the first one? Well, it's kind of expensive.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
the free testosterone is relatively inexpensive. All of these other things start to make the lab results become more expensive. You can certainly have it done on the first one. You're still going to need to have a second one done. Okay. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to be paying hundreds and hundreds of dollars for both of these things when you could just have these other hormones tested on a single draw at a second time. Okay.
Hey,
Now, being overweight and obese, you want to say something?
yeah, I want to say real quick,
Go ahead.
having the first complete panel is done is super important because there are other factors that can show up on your panel that could completely confuse everything that you look at, especially areas like thyroid issues, even your blood sugars can really screw up kind of all of that. And so, yeah, do the one with that's the best thing to do is to do the one with a complete panel, and then the second time do FSH, LH, and SHBG, and albumin.
Mm-hmm.
Just saying.
Yeah. So adiposity does have an effect on hormone production.
Yes.
So that's, why you're checking for other things. And then if your total levels are not concordant with your symptoms. So you
Right.
may have the total test done the first time. You come in, you're presenting with symptoms, right? And it's affecting your quality of life. You have the first one done, total testosterone comes back in a normal range. Remember that SHBG concentrations are your total testosterone should be roughly 50 to 60% bound to SHBG. If your total testosterone comes back within the normal range, but your SHBG is high, which means the bioavailable concentration is much, much lower than it should be. Okay, so that's kind of another reason why you're having these other tests done. So we're looking to pinpoint exactly what the problem is, and then the appropriate treatments can be taken from there.
Right.
All right. Now, let's say that you went in and you had your second draw. FSH, LH, or SHBG comes back altered. This may require even a third draw. Okay. So if your total testosterone levels are low on 2 occasions, as well as a low FSH, LH, or high SBG, you may have to go see an endocrinologist, and they may do some other tests for specific genetics, gonadotropin releasing hormone, cortisol, prolactin, thyroid stimulating hormone, and other markers of insulin resistance. All right. So I want to stress it again. It's important to rule out as many things as possible before finding specific hormone replacement therapies. Okay. Now, units. So in the United States, testosterone is mostly going to be expressed as nanograms per deciliter. Everywhere else, you're probably going to see it as nanomoles. Picomoles, you're probably not going to see that unit very often. FSH, LH, and gonadotropin releasing hormone are generally expressed as IUs per liter, international units per liter. You may see it expressed as milli-international units. That's generally only happens in research papers. SHBG also is nanograms per milliliter. um, or in America, everywhere else, nanomoles per liter. And albumin will be expressed either as grams per liter or grams per deciliter. One of them, it's just a conversion of 10. You don't really need to be too keen on those units because normally when you are receiving your work, it will have the ranges. And so you just kind of need to look at numbers within the ranges. All right. So talking about what is normal and what is low. So unfortunately, there isn't a consensus on the cutoff of what low is. Some men are going to be asymptomatic, meaning you don't have any symptoms at lower levels, and other people are going to have severe symptoms within normal ranges. Most experts have agreed that a range less than 350 for total testosterone, 350 nanograms per deciliter, as being low, regardless of age. So that's kind of what most doctors and stuff are going to go by. Now, individual labs and certain T clinics are going to have their own definitions as to what is optimal. And these are usually categorized by age. And most of these ranges are completely arbitrary. So a lot of these individual labs who specialize in sex hormones or T clinics or individual providers who specialize in sex hormones, they're going to have their own categories. Their optimized, quote unquote, optimized ranges are pretty arbitrary. And you have to remember that they are in the business of selling hormones.
Yes, I'm glad you said that.
Okay. So that's it. All right. So there's no single range that's going to fit all individuals. If hormone replacement therapy is advised by your doctor, the goals generally should be to treat the patient and not the labs. Okay. So you could walk in with perfectly fine total testosterone numbers, but you're experiencing severe symptoms. And I think most doctors are going to work with you on that. And they're going to be looking to treat your symptoms, improve symptoms. All right. So symptom resolution should include, but not be limited to, the restoration of libido or sex drive, restoration of body composition, restoration of recovery from workouts. And I included that because we're mainly talking about physically active men here. Restoration of the mood and cognitive function. So we want to see that brain fog go away and for you to feel happy, most of the time, and restoration of hormone levels to physiologic levels. Um, as a little aside here, so I do take testosterone. I am on hormone replacement therapy, and I will say that going on it, you hear some stories online that I just don't find to be the normal case here. So it just makes you feel normal. It doesn't create this superhuman response to things. You just kind of feel normal after a couple of weeks.
Hey, go back to
Uh,
that slide, please.
yeah.
So, and kind of in addition to what Coach Lamby just said, it's like, so it says symptom resolution should include, but not be limited to. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily, in my case, it doesn't necessarily include all five of those.
Mhm.
Restoration, libido, sex drive, restoration of body composition, blah 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 blah. So my body composition wasn't what I wanted it to when I started working out, and but I wasn't really concerned because that wasn't a low testosterone thing to me,
Mhm.
and I had a doc do a test on me because I'd had some kidney stones or whatever, and he did a test on me. I'm gonna run your testosterone test too. And he came back and he this really super low number, and I'm like, oh my god. And he go, oh, we should do this, this, this. But my libido was fine.
Mhm.
My body composition wasn't great, but I wasn't working out hard. But and restoration of mood, I was fine. Cognitive function, great. Hormone levels, physiology, that was everything was great. The only thing that was anything to me was recovery from workouts. That's the only thing that that I felt anything with. So I felt normal.
Yeah.
And he only did that one test. So upon
Mhm.
a second test, my second test was like way higher. And so I don't know if he's just trying to sell me on, getting testosterone or scare me or whatever. But, you know, should include but not be limited to. So those things didn't apply to me. I mean, one of them applied to me. So in my mind, I was like, what is going on? Wait a minute, I don't have any of this other stuff. So it didn't alarm me, and I didn't pursue testosterone at the time. So I just wanted
Yeah,
to say that.
that's a good point. And I think ultimately over the whole course of this kind of lecture here, um, hopefully I will address this issue, but I think that a lot of guys will seek out hormone replacement therapy specifically for those issues that you're talking about. Well, my body
Mhm.
composition isn't what I'd like it to be,
Right,
and my recovery from workouts isn't where I'd like it to be either. And so those two issues probably are going to be the most common reasons why got men seek out some testosterone. And so, yeah, so you're absolutely right. So just having those in the absence of all of those other things, like you feel normal otherwise throughout your day, sleep is fine, everything else is
right,
fine. You're just not where you want to be physically.
right,
Uh, yeah, probably need to look at addressing other issues rather than getting
right,
testosterone. Yeah.
right. Sorry, I just wanted to butt that in for a second.
Yeah, no, that's good. So hopefully I have made a good case here that testing is not as simple as a total testosterone number.
Right,
Okay. Now, having gone through this whole portion of the lecture, testosterone effects on the human body are not as simple as a total testosterone number. Hopefully this had been made clear. If it's not, anyone can send me questions. Now, what role does diet play? All right, generally speaking here, protein doesn't seem to have a huge effect on testosterone production, except at the extreme ends. So what I could generally find is if you are getting like 3 grams per pound of body weight or higher, or if it was like really, really low. So if you're way, way under the recommendations, and the recommendation is like 50 grams a day. So if you're getting like 20 grams of protein a day, that's when we start to see effects. But I think that those levels of protein are probably just a proxy measurement for malnutrition. Otherwise, protein doesn't seem to have a huge effect, which leaves us with the low carb versus low fat question. And this, when you start looking through both the scientific literature and stuff online, it seems to be just a shotgun blast of what's doing what.
yeah,
And so I think I found a pretty good signal in the noise here. Generally, low carb diets will see an increase in total testosterone levels, and low fat diets, you will see a decrease in total testosterone levels. But wait, there is more. All right, now both of these diets don't tend to seem to have any effect on LH or FSH. Okay, so we see testosterone levels going up in low carb, testosterone levels going down in low fat, but LH and FSH don't seem to be affected. We also see a concordant reaction with SHBG. So on low carb, SHBG goes up, low fat, it goes down. So overall, what we have, both diets don't seem to have an effect on LH and FSH. Low carb, we see an increase in total testosterone and sex hormone binding globulin. Low fat decreases. All right. Now, if we go back and we think about the pituitary gland releases LH and FSH, and those bind to the Leydig cells in the testes. Okay. And the concentration, so the amount of LH and FSH, should stimulate either more or less testosterone production. So if we're not seeing a change in LH or FSH, theoretically here, we should not be seeing changes in testosterone levels.
right.
Are you with me?
Absolutely.
Makes sense.
Yep.
All right. So dealing with my headphones here. All right. So what the heck is going on with these diets? Our old pal insulin.
My buddy.
Insulin is an anabolic hormone. All right. And we also know that there is a direct relationship between insulin and androgenic hormones in certain disease states like PCOS, type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Okay. So insulin levels within these disease states have effects on androgen production. We also see in prostate cancer that there is a wide use of androgen deprivation therapy that is effective at treating prostate cancer. And what this therapy does is it reduces, so we're reducing the amount of androgenic hormones, which decreases the amount of androgen receptor activity. Now, people going through androgen deprivation therapy are at more risk for type 2 diabetes. So when you have prostate cancer and you go through this therapy, you're at a higher risk for type 2 diabetes. We also see that men who have type 2 diabetes are more at risk for prostate cancer. So there's a direct relationship between these things. Okay.
Right.
And this took me a while to figure out. And I can't find a lot of science backing me up on this, but I have put this through several AIs. So through ChatGPT, Bing's, I think it's Bard, and another one, and they all tell me that my theory here is correct. So what I think is happening is that the levels of insulin between these two diets is having an effect on the mTOR pathway. All right, so insulin will bind to its receptor on the cell, and this is a very, very simplified version of what's happening here. Okay. So it will stimulate certain pathways, which ultimately leads to the mTOR pathway. And the mTOR pathway has an effect on androgen receptor activity. Okay. So as the insulin binds to the receptor there, stimulates pathways, we have an influence on androgen receptor. So as testosterone comes into the cell, you'll notice that the receptor for testosterone is inside the cell, not outside the cell. That goes back to that whole protein thing.
Right.
All right. So because it does not have a protein, it does not have to have a receptor on the outside of a cell. So we're seeing an influence on the receptor activity. So on a higher carbohydrate diet or low fat, however you want to look at it, you would have an increase in insulin, right? Carbs stimulate insulin, also does protein to some effect. So more insulin binding to more insulin receptors is a higher anabolic signal, which would have more signaling on the mTOR pathway, which would stimulate more androgen receptor activity. When we go on a diet where we are decreasing insulin stimulating foods, we have lower levels of insulin binding to lower insulin receptors, stimulating less mTOR pathway, leading to less androgen receptor activity. All right, so we have these testosterone hormones that are coming into the cell, but they can't bind to these receptors because they're just not active. The receptors aren't active. And what we end up having is a backing up of testosterone in the serum. It's not being utilized by the cell. Okay, so we have a backing up of testosterone happening. And this is my theory. Doesn't the amount of testosterone in our system affect this negative feedback system? We go all the way back to there, right? Okay, yes, but it is only the free T that is signaling to the pituitary gland and the hypothalamus to release LH, FSH, and gonadotropin releasing hormones. Okay, so the SHBG bound and the albumin bound testosterone is not doing the signaling. What happens on our low carb diet? Total testosterone goes up. We have this backing up of testosterone, which would lead to higher levels of free T, except we also have an increase in sex hormone binding globulin. So that sex hormone binding globulin is more of it binding to more free testosterone, which is actually leading to no change in the free testosterone. Okay, so increased sex hormone binding globulin binds to backed up free T, leading to higher total testosterone levels, but the effect is either no change or a net negative in free T for the low carb dieters. And then the inverse happens on the low fat dieters. So we have increased androgen receptor activity leads to less circulating free T, and lower SHBG levels are bound to lower levels of free T, leading to either a no change or a net positive of free T in the high carb dieters. And this is also supported by evidence where we see we have randomized control trials where we put people on either a low carb diet or a low fat diet, and we have them do resistance training, and we measure how much increase in lean mass is either gained or not gained. And what we see in the literature there is that low carb diets tend to lead to lower levels of muscle gain than high carb diets do. Now, as far as strength is concerned, there doesn't seem to be an effect there, more because that has to do with neural pathways rather than how big the muscle is. So, but having an anabolic effect on muscle tissue, low carb diets have a lower effect. You don't gain as much muscle on a low carb diet as you do a high carb diet. All right. So before we get into the body weight and leanness, help me out, Dwayne. Did I make it fairly clear how carbohydrates affect testosterone levels?
Yes, it's kind of complicated,
It's a little
but
complicated.
it's a little complicated. One thing that I just want you to do, I was going to butt in a little bit while ago, but I let you go on because you're on a roll. So I think you might want to explain what the mTOR pathways are. I mean, we just kind of went there, and without, there may be people who have no clue what that is. So I need you to
Yes.
go over and just explain what an mTOR pathway is. And then also, after you've done the mTOR pathway thing, just recap that with like, so you have a high carb diet. So you have either a, no apparent change in free testosterone or a net increase. As a low carb diet, you're going to have either no free testosterone change or a negative, uh, uh, a lower number. I think that's exactly how you put it. And the graphic was really cool too, by the way. So that's a good way to remember it. But just let's skip back just for the mTOR definition and kind of what that is, and then move back up to that other slide so that you can just look at that one more time.
Okay. Yeah. So explaining the pathways is the pathways are actually quite complex. And if I explain the whole thing,
Yeah, don't
it's
get too deep.
probably gonna, it's probably gonna, most people are gonna have a loss of knowledge here rather than a gain of knowledge.
Or they're just
So
going to check out one or the other.
basically what we're talking about here is anabolic signaling. Okay, the signal to your tissues to be in a state of growth.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so
Yes.
what that means is more insulin to a certain point, right? Of course, you can have insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia, but we're talking about normal, healthy people. So more insulin effectively leads to more anabolic signaling to the cell.
Right.
Okay. So as insulin is making its way to these receptors, the signal for the cell to grow, that signal is stronger. Okay. And so certain things are happening within the cell, and mTOR is one of those things. And mTOR is telling the androgen receptors. Okay. So it's you're getting the signal from insulin, which is telling the androgen receptors, in order for this cell to produce growth, we need to accept more androgenic hormone.
Right.
Does that
Right.
make sense?
Yeah. Accept it and bind to it inside the cell.
Right.
Yeah.
And so as insulin levels go down, you have less receptors sending less signals. So you have a lower
Right.
signaling inside the cell for
Right.
anabolic response, for a growth response. So everything is in systems in the body here. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So as the as the information in the cell is receiving these signals from the outside of the cell, it's telling the inside of the cell, hey, we need to turn down the acceptance of these androgenic hormones because we just don't need them.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And so when we go on a low carb diet, what ends up happening is you're having less of a signal from insulin. So there's less
Right.
anabolic signaling, which means inside the cell, it's saying, hey, we need to turn off some of these receptors. We don't need to accept all of this. And so the production of testosterone isn't changing between these two diets.
Right.
So that may be the key here. The
Right.
production of testosterone is not changing. The reason we're seeing the level go up in low carb diets is because that testosterone is backing up. All right. So if we think about this like container ships coming into a port, we have two ports. One port has one crane operator offloading these ships, right? And
Right.
both ports are receiving the same number of ships per day.
Right.
So one port has one crane operator, the other port has 10 crane operators. Okay.
Right.
You're
Right.
going to see in the port with one crane operator that ships are going to start to be backed up in the channel because he can't unload those containers fast enough.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And so the signal back to the manufacturer is like, oh, don't keep sending us so many ships.
Yeah, how to make that, because we're talking about SHBG. So what SHBG does here, we go back to the biology lecture here. When I said SHBG doesn't really act as a taxi, it acts more of an escort. What
Right.
SHBG is doing for that testosterone molecule is preventing it from being converted.
Right. Right.
Right. So that the
Yep.
ratios of testosterone, estradiol, dihydrotestosterone remain the same.
Right.
So it isn't like it's acting as a delivery, as a like a package drop off where it's picking up testosterone, taking it somewhere and dropping it off, because the testosterone could do that on its own. It can move there on its own. SHBG is acting more like an escort, whereas that testosterone is floating through your blood until it gets where it's going. SHBG is preventing aromatase and 5-alpha reductase from having an effect on that testosterone.
Right.
So what your body is doing is it's sensing this increase in free testosterone on a low carb diet, and it's increasing the production of sex hormone binding globulin so that your ratios of hormones remains the same.
Yes.
Okay. So because we are seeing an increase, and this is something that we see a lot online, is people go on ketogenic diets or the carnivore diet and seeing their free testosterone levels going up. And then you also see vegan, vegetarian diet. Those, if we look at population level studies, vegans and vegetarians do tend to have lower total testosterone numbers.
Right.
However, the amount of free T, the amount of bioavailable T really isn't different between the two. And it may even be higher. That bioavailable T is even higher in the group consuming less fat. Up to a certain point here, you need to consume fat in order to have testosterone production, hormone production at all. But
Right.
so that's what's happening between these two diets. There doesn't seem to be an effect on biological available, except that it could be possibly detrimental in the low carb situation.
Right. Yep. I got that. If somebody didn't, that's a great, and that frame right there is
and that's
awesome.
I'm supporting that by evidence when we look at trials where they put people into two groups, either a low carb or a low fat, and they hold protein and calories equated. The low fat group tends to have higher increases in muscle mass than the low carb group does.
Yes.
So that anabolic signaling effect that I'm talking about, I think, is the main reason why we're seeing that happen.
Right. And guys, if that still confuses y'all, make sure you just send a question, drop a question and send it to Coach Lamby.
Send a question. I tried to make this as easy as I could. It's very complex.
Yeah.
But here it is. All right. Now, body weight and leanness. Body weight and body leanness definitely has an effect on testosterone production. anti levels. So the more obese you are, the higher your body fat percentage is, you're going to probably see lower testosterone levels. Okay. And you're also going to have a lower biological effect of those testosterone levels. So going back to type 2 diabetes and all that stuff, if you have type 2 diabetes, you generally tend to have low free T, total T, and it's we see like just balloons.
Yeah, did you see the balloons? That's
Yeah.
awesome.
We also see
That's free
SHBG go down,
testosterone
but
right there, brother.
yeah, that's free. All right. So yeah. So as you get closer to being a healthy normal body weight for men, that's usually between like 14 and 20% body fat percentage. The closer you get to that, especially for specifically for you, you'll see your optimized hormone levels or hormone production. And then definitely once you go below that body fat percentage, like there was that point that summer, was it last summer? Like I got super shredded. I was like 10%. I felt like crap.
Yeah, but I couldn't even hang out with you because people were just like, people saw your picture. I don't know how, but it leaked out on the internet. And it's like, wow, I can't even
Yeah.
work out with you now, bro.
Yeah, I felt like
But you were miserable.
garbage. I was
You were
miserable.
miserable.
I looked fantastic, but I was not happy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right, getting into the bulking and cutting. So testosterone production is going to depend on body fat percentages. It's also going to depend on lean mass, and it's also going to depend on the length and severity of these phases. And this is one of the reasons why I like prolonged maintenance phases. All right, so our center section here would represent a bulk. So length and severity of that thing, and also body fat. So if you all are already kind of a high body fat, and then you're going on a bulk on top of that, and it's going to be a pretty hypercaloric, right? So instead of just adding a couple hundred calories, you're adding like 1,000. And then you also have like what people are calling perma bulk because they just can't stop eating. You're just constantly gaining weight. You're constantly in a hypercaloric state. You will probably see testosterone levels go down over time. And then the same thing for this cutting phase. All right. So if you're already lean, like where I was already 10% body fat, if I decided to continue to go with that, and my caloric deficit was pretty steep, and I was trying to do it for a whole year, you're going to probably see testosterone levels go down. Okay. So this is one of the reasons why I recommend not having super, super high or super, super low calorie deficits or surpluses. And then generally being in a state of a healthy body fat before doing
Right,
either one of those things,
right, right,
and also having a prolonged maintenance period. Okay. Because you want a lot of that stuff to return to normal. So even though we see like you may be in a calorie deficit and then you come out of it, you go to maintenance, and let's say you take blood draws at 3 months time frame, whatever, before and after, and we see that testosterone levels went down on this cut, but then when I brought my maintenance calories back up, they went back up. That doesn't mean everything is back to normal.
right,
Remember, the purpose of hormone replacement therapy would be to treat symptoms, not lab
right,
numbers.
right,
So
right,
just because we're seeing lab numbers change in the literature regarding these cutting and bulking phases does not mean that the biological activity that those hormones are having an effect on is being fixed right away. Okay.
right.
All right. And then diet composition. So we're talking about our micronutrients. So I've talked about the macronutrients, protein, fat, and carbohydrates. Getting down to the diet composition. Something that's pretty popular out there is the if it fits your macros style of eating, or flexible dieting. If most of your diet is coming from highly processed foods, highly processed grains, added sugars, and refined meats or processed meats and stuff, that can have effect on your testosterone as well.
Right.
So, somebody who is the same person who could be either cutting or bulking being on either one of these diets, mostly minimally processed whole foods, you're probably going to see a better effect of testosterone production and the biological effect that that testosterone has on your body, rather than somebody who's eating a diet made of mainly, Pop-Tarts, beef jerky, and protein shakes. All right.
Pop-Tarts, beef jerky, and protein. There's nothing wrong with a protein shake.
Nothing wrong with a protein shake.
Or the occasional Pop-Tart. Just
Yeah.
gonna say.
If it's making up the majority of your diet, though,
yeah,
and
absolutely.
you are experiencing these symptoms, so that goes all the way back to this thing before hopping on the I need testosterone shot bus, maybe improve the quality of your diet a little bit. So, because like I say, I take testosterone, I have to take an injection, and I take it a shot roughly once every 3 days. And look, man, it's not super fun after a few years of doing this, and it's the rest of my life. So
yeah. So one thing that I was looking at, maybe this isn't the right time to put this in there, but one of the things that I was really studying on was nutritional items that and how they affect your testosterone levels as a whole. Your whole numbers, and everything that we just saw on that graphic on the right hand side. Those are all things that have positive. They seem to have positive effects. I didn't go off into the studies, but the studies that were cited most often were the nurses, the medical. Was it the NHS? Is that the one I'm thinking about?
Nurses' health studies and the professional health professionals follow-up.
Yes. So that study is where most of that came from. But things like grapes, seeds, nuts, chicken, oily fish.
So that's getting into the micronutrient side of that, which is like magnesium, zinc, vitamin D, and stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was also going to ask you about vitamin D. Is there a direct correlation on vitamin D intake to testosterone? And the other question I wanted to say is do you find this to be the case, or is it more of just wives' tales that one of the symptoms of low T is fat production, but particularly for men in that middle belly area, like you kind of got that basketball thing going on. So I've known guys where I used to work for the city that they started doing the testosterone treatments, and they were carrying around the little basketball, and they started thinning out. And I was like, dude, man, are you working out? You're looking great. No, I'm on testosterone, man. I'm like, okay. So I don't know if there's a correlation for that or not. Can you help me with those
absolutely.
two questions?
Yeah, so vitamin D status does directly have an effect on testosterone levels. And if you are vitamin D deficient, which I believe I covered in the slide, right? Which would be like a comprehensive panel, getting those vitamin D, iron, zinc, magnesium, and stuff. So if you are deficient, like frank deficient in those vitamins, then supplementation of those specific vitamins or improving your diet quality, because that would be the reason you would be deficient in some of those things. Would be mostly is diet quality. And supplements is something that we didn't talk about either. Philip didn't specifically ask about supplements.
Right.
But yeah, so if you are frank deficient in something, then increasing nutrient status of that thing, specifically vitamin D, magnesium, zinc, will improve your testosterone levels.
Now that's not a green light. And of course, this isn't medical advice, but that's not a green light to go out and say, "Oh man, so a quick way for me to increase my testosterone is start loading on vitamin D." No, you got to do the comprehensive panel, because you start loading on vitamin D where you're not deficient, you're going to screw stuff up in your body.
Yeah, and it's good to check that stuff. You bring up a good point too, because there's a lot of advice online about how to like lower SBH, sex hormone binding globulin levels, regarding different foods that you can eat or different supplements that you can take. And then there's other things. So like Tongkat Ali is a big one. There's a lot of people promoting a lot of stuff out there. And, hopefully let me see if I can share this screen again. Let me find it.
And that's all part of that noise that we were talking about at the very beginning. There's a lot of noise out there, a lot of advice that's not, it's not, some of that advice is not stuff you should accept,
Yeah.
not without going to your doctor.
So let me share this screen again. So there's a lot of advice out there about increasing your free T levels, decreasing your SHB levels, all of this stuff to try and increase the amount of biological available testosterone. Now, going back to this slide, remember, you start messing around with these SHBG levels and free testosterone levels and all these things, and you start having an issue where the conversion and the ratios start to become out of whack. Okay, yeah, you might see your muscles grow. You might also end up with a biceps tendon tear.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, you may
Yes.
also start to see an effect of osteopenia. Your bone mineral
Yes.
density will go down. You can start to have see effect on liver enzyme production.
Yes.
All right. So yeah, you need to discuss this stuff with your doctor, especially these supplements that are touted as increasing testosterone. Tongkat Ali, like I say, seems to be the popular one. Before that was ashwagandha. Yeah, like number one, they don't have that big of an effect.
Yeah.
I haven't done a super deep dive into that stuff. Maybe we can, but what I have seen, especially with Tongkat Ali, is like there seems to be a maybe about a 20% increase in testosterone. And people will tout it online as like you'll see 100 to 200 nanogram per deciliter increase. Well, that depends on what your free testosterone was in the beginning.
Right.
If you look at meta-analysis and randomized control trials where
Right.
they take men who start out with testosterone levels in like the 250 to 300 range, you're seeing an increase of like 40 to 60 nanograms per deciliter.
Right. Right.
All right. But if your testosterone at the beginning of the trial was 800, you're going to see an increase in like 150, 180, something like that.
Right.
So
Right.
it's about a 20% increase. And the people who are promoting it are the people who are reading the abstract. And hopefully this theme comes through again, right? Is just because the abstract says that there was a statistically significant or significant increase in testosterone does not mean that that is a clinically relevant increase.
Right.
Nor does it mean that you're seeing increases specifically in the things that you want to see, right? So
yeah. I started eating bark off of my pine tree, and man, my testosterone shot way up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what about the in men who have experienced weight gain and
the
particularly
body
in the
fat
mental
thing.
section? Right.
Yeah. So going back to the negative feedback loop there. So having testosterone issues does tend to increase that central adiposity in men. So having that belly, and then that increase in fat tissue there tends to have a negative effect on testosterone. So what you end up with is this vicious loop. And there is a lot of evidence in the literature, and also we see it in clinical practice, is a lot of men with type 2 diabetes, and I think women too, being treated with hormone replacement therapy to help with that insulin resistance. And if you aren't quite at that point of having diabetes, and you're seeing a little bit of fat tissue around the midsection there, that may be something to go talk to your doctor, especially if it's accompanied by a lot of those symptoms that we talked about. Hormone replacement therapy, very well. And that's getting back to the body composition thing, right? So just because you aren't seeing the changes in the gym, that's not what I'm talking about when we're talking about symptom resolution as far as body composition goes. I'm not talking
Right.
about your inability to make gains in the gym, because that could be affected by other things, right? It's
Right.
generally about like, why am I getting all this fat in my belly?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And have the panels done because,
Mm-hmm.
oh, you go to your doctor and say, I think I need to have a blood draw panel because I'm really putting a little bit of weight on here in the middle. Maybe it's my testosterone.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Dwayne, you got to stop eating a half-gallon ice cream every night. We've talked
Yeah.
about this, you
Yeah.
know. So it's not just one. It's not just one symptom. It's not just one thing. You have to look at that whole set of
Yeah. It's very, very complex. It cannot come down to a total testosterone number or just looking at these things in isolation. Well, if my free testosterone goes, if I can alter this, that thing, and the other thing, it's very complex. There's all these negative feedback loops, and if you go around, because you saw somebody on YouTube who said, I switched to carnivore diet, my total testosterone went up and my sex hormone binding globulin went down because I ate whatever, I don't know, beef liver.
well,
That yeah, just because, it isn't about labs. Okay. It
yeah,
isn't just
yeah,
about these numbers. And that's one of the reasons why these ranges are so wide and so confusing.
right, right,
Right. So you need to talk with your doctor about this stuff. If you feel like your doctor isn't very knowledgeable on the subject, then maybe make an appointment with an endocrinologist. Don't just go into the T clinics.
right.
But get a referral from your doctor to go see an endocrinologist and have this stuff. Because if you don't address the correct things, you're gonna probably screw something up even more. So
Yep, yep. Good stuff.
yeah. All right, let's stop the share there. All right, cool. So, hopefully that answers all the questions. If stuff was still confusing, because I know that this is a very complex topic and I tried to make everything as simple as I possibly could. And I really, really there's a doctor, that I wanted to have come on, but he did not respond to me. So we are where we are. I would have rather this came from him, but,
I
yeah,
think it was awesome. I think you did a great job
thanks.
wallowing through. Man, when my anatomy and physiology class, just in preparation for X-rays, uh, is like it was just a nightmare. And going at that stuff and understanding how a cell works,
Hmm.
and I mean, just this conversation today, that even just barely scratches the surface of how a cell
Oh
works.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
so bizarre. It's just amazing. So I think you did a great job of working through that. I really
good,
do.
cool.
Hats off
Yeah,
to you, bro.
thanks. Yeah, and so one of Philip's questions was about busting the myth between low carb, and so I felt like having some kind of a basic understanding of biology, cellular biology, and biochemistry, going through all that stuff would help, with making the case. So, because this was very, very fun to do for me, because once I got to that point where I found the signal and the noise, what effect carbohydrate was having, and then looking back at like, well, if FSH and LH aren't changing, why are we seeing this? So it was pretty interesting, um, to number one have to review cellular biology and finding the anabolic signal from insulin and having an
Right,
effect on mTOR and all that stuff. So
right, 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 right.
a very cool
Absolutely.
topic.
Very good. Very good.
All
It was
right.
excellent.
So hopefully somebody's mind was blown. Dwayne, I hope I blew your mind.
Yeah, this is, one more question. So
Okay.
when I really started lifting heavy, I
Mhm.
started growing this beard. Can you explain? Oh wait, my wife likes it. That's all that's important.
You know what though? That actually brings up another thing to think about. So as I'm
It
talking
does.
about all of these supplements, and so you have people touting like the Tongkat Ali, when you look at randomized control trials where they have a placebo intervention, so randomized placebo controlled, one group is getting Tongkat Ali and the other group is getting a placebo, but they also do resistance training, you end up seeing the same effect on testosterone from the Tongkat Ali as the placebo.
Isn't that crazy?
So
That's crazy.
yeah. So lifting weights, so resistance training, training heavy will improve your testosterone levels just as much as Tomcat LE, quote unquote, does.
Yeah. Agreed.
So
Agreed.
all right. Well, okay. Yeah. If you have any questions, send them to me. Hopefully minds were blown. Hopefully somebody took something away. And
Yep.
we will see you guys next time.
See you later.
Coach Lamby and Dwayne out.